Thank you very much. So I'm delighted to be here, and I will talk fast, and I'm from New Jersey, so I can do that. Hopefully not use my hands as much as I usually do. So what I have been looking at is the federal government's Open Government Initiative and how that is affecting collaborative governance, public participation, and the quality of interaction between government and stakeholders in decision making. So, there we go. So the Open Government Initiative was announced by President Obama on his first full day of office, and he announced that he was committing to an unprecedented level of openness in government, and the idea behind becoming more open was to strengthen the democracy, to promote efficiency and effectiveness in government. How were we going to do that? Well, basically by pursuing a three-pronged approach. Okay? Transparency, participation, and collaboration. And by calling on all of the federal agencies to develop and issue and then operate pursuant to plans which would open them up to greater intersection with the public. Transparency was the initial piece and has been the focus, in fact, of most of the activity by the agencies over the last 5 years. So transparency focused mainly on pushing government-held data assets out to the public, making them available first and foremost through a portal called data.gov now. It's gone through a few iterations of its name. And then actually, after making it available, circling back and making it usable. And so data visualization and improvements in availability and accessibility and interoperability of government data have been much the focus of later subsequent efforts by the agencies. But the idea was if we get more and more data that we hold out there, the public will be able to engage in greater accountability, greater oversight. They'll hold us accountable for what we're doing. It will help build some trust, maybe rebuild some trust in government. But also, these data are real assets, and if we liberate them, then innovative members of society will be able to come in and use those data to build apps and other tools that will be effective in solving public policy problems, public administration challenges, and so on. And so from transparency, the second pillar is participation. How do we actually stimulate greater participation by the governed public in public governance? And how do we use technology to leverage public participation and enhance it? And again, the idea being we'll get so many more new ideas about how to solve all the many problems facing our society if we can really enhance those interactions between government and the public. And there's a lot of dispersed knowledge and expertise out there that we're not able to tap into that now we can tap into more effectively if we use technology. And finally, collaboration. How do we make sure that we are using technology in ways that are effective to enhance collaboration, to reach out to stakeholders, to enable a better quality conversation, discussion, discourse, decision-making, and in the service of making government more effective and making it more efficient to solve problems. So those were the goals. And while these three goals were not solely technology focused and driven, technology was called out specifically as a means for helping to achieve all of these. Okay. So the questions that I've been interested in are, what are agencies actually doing? What have they been doing? Mm-hmm. They have gone through 3 iterations now of developing their individual agency plans to pursue and participate in this Open Government Initiative. In 2010, they issued their first plans. In 2012, they updated them, and the initiative calls for an update every 2 years. And then in June of 2014, they issued 3.0. So I've been looking at these and taking a look at what are they doing, particularly online, to enhance public participation and collaboration. The transparency piece, as I said before, has been the big focus, dumping more data out there so that people can get access to it, and then trying to make it more usable and more user-friendly. But what about these other 2 elements which are so critical to achieving the overall goals of the program? How do the agencies define and measure success? How should they define and measure success? What barriers are they facing in improving public participation and stakeholder collaboration, and how can we overcome those? And what impact has technology actually had on all of these efforts? So the way I've been going about looking at this with a graduate student and some colleagues is to look at the Open Government Initiative documents, the ones that set out the plan to begin with, the many memoranda and guidance documents and things like that that have tried to give further emphasis to certain areas within this initiative. The agency's plans 1.0 through most recently 3.0, some existing reviews of those plans that some nonprofit organizations undertook and the GAO undertook back in between 2010 and 2012. And then the agency cites and public sources to see what have they actually been doing. All of the programs, the initiatives that they announce in their plans to work with the public, to work with stakeholders, are those actually up and running? If they're not, how come not? Have they had some experience that has caused them to go back and rethink some of these efforts and their success and so on? And what I began and have now circled back on some revisions to the interview protocol and will be engaging in with agency officials is structured interviews to ask some questions about how is this actually operating in practice, what are the barriers you see, what are the successes. So in terms of metrics to measure success, there's actually very little out there from the government itself that is specific or gives the agencies a lot of guidance, other than to say, hey, we generally want you to embed a new culture in how you operate. We want you to be open and transparent and participatory and all of that. But the words are used a lot without much explanation as to what that might mean. And of course, federal regulatory agencies span a wide variety of subject matter areas. Their missions are very different. Some are extremely public-facing and interactive from the get-go, like the Department of the Interior, which manages public lands and so is dealing with the public a lot. Same with the Department of Transportation. Others, not so much. The Department of Defense, okay, for example, is not, reaching out for a lot of guidance from we the people on a regular basis in the same way. But they are called on to sort of embed this new culture in their agency work, to respond regularly to public input, to use innovative tools, and some are specifically called out in the initiative, and I'll talk a little bit more in a second about them, like contests and public challenges, to try to, again, get people to contribute those ideas that full-time government officials themselves may not be generating. And then also changes to internal management and internal policies to facilitate both interagency and intra-agency and public-facing collaboration. Okay. The White House announced that it was going to actually put forth some metrics and best practices on public participation. That's coming sometime this year. The year's not up yet, so we'll see where that ends up. But really the implied criteria, and what you saw just from my very first slide, I think, are these measures. How many new jobs? How much increased trade and economic activity? A lot of what is motivating this program is let's really open up what the government has by way of assets to generate improved economic activity, to start crowdsourcing our problems of public administration, to push some of those issues back into the private sector to solve. Okay. So cost savings to government by doing that, cost savings to the private sector in terms of liberating assets, not just data, but also software, for example. So more open source software tools that government actors have been involved in developing, to improve the quality of government decision making by ensuring that all necessary voices or appropriate relevant voices are heard, that potential problems with a particular path government decision making may be going in are brought to light, and so on. Streamlining government services and enhancing public trust. These are really the measures at the end of the day that will matter, that I think are motivating this effort. How you measure that is sometimes a challenge, how you concretize that. One thing we know going in, talking about public participation from research, and collaboration 2 is that there are certain features, whether you're doing this face-to-face or you're doing it online, that are likelier to lead to success in terms of improving both the satisfaction of participants in the process and the products of the process. So for participation, starting out with a clear purpose for the participation, and that participation is meaningful, and that's clear to the participants going in, and they see it be meaningful in the outcomes. Strategic or random participant selection as opposed to self-selection, okay, of who gets to join the conversation. Accessible and neutral framing of the issues, so that if you're calling on the public to weigh in on a problem, they understand what you're asking them to do, they understand the nature of the issue. It's framed neutrally. That the process is deliberative, so don't just ask people to express preferences, but actually give them some background information, and then in a structured way and in a facilitated way, really deliberate the pros and cons of certain approaches on policy, and get more substantive input that way. If we engage people in sort of a policy analysis or decision-making phase rather than just the ideation phase at the very, very outset, that can be very powerful. And giving people who do participate timely feedback, and again, the demonstrated use of their input, that it's important. Otherwise, people drop out. If what they're saying and doing is not mattering in some clear way, they'll drop out of it. And similarly with collaborations, very, very similar things that tend to matter. So far, what have we seen? Well, I'm still going through some of the data, but so far, we actually have a lot of the self-selected diffuse public. The way that agencies are largely engaging the public, especially online, is having websites that say, give us your ideas, right? So it's self-selected, it's at the ideation stage, and early in the policy-making process. Occasionally there are feedback loops in those calls for public input, but not always, and so the quality feedback coming back is not always there. Not terribly deliberative, not usually facilitated or structured conversations. And the way so far that agencies measure their success is very process-centric versus outcome-centric. So they're counting social media hits, for example. The agencies have made a big push to have a presence in every social media forum that they think has a large audience. So they're tweeting and they're Snapchatting and they're Instagramming and they've got a YouTube channel and all of this stuff, which is great. But that is, like the hits and those sorts of counts are largely how they've been looking at outcomes and how many ideas have been contributed, but there's little so far discussion of, well, which ideas have mattered to us, which have actually found their way into agency work and why. Okay. And relatively little discussion of training within the agencies to help agency personnel do all of this more effectively. Okay. And similarly with collaboration, the online efforts are still mainly intra-agency and inter-agency, and they're very efficiency-focused. How can we make sure that we're talking to the units within our vast, far-flung agency, and doing that maybe in a way that saves travel costs and that gets some more people in the virtual room. External stakeholder collaboration, members of the public, business, nonprofit organizations, and so on. Still, a lot of that is offline. Sorry, and some mixed. And mainly, the collaboration has been sort of crowdsourcing. So far, or contests, again, open it up to the public, give us your ideas, and maybe we'll incubate some of those. The most interesting things I've seen, I think, in collaboration are trying to co-produce public services, so where you get the public involved in trying to actually deliver certain services along with a government agency, and things like citizen science and crowdsourcing agency work. So, for example, if you're NASA, putting up a website where you ask the public to post astronomical observations on a regular basis, or if you're the archives, National Archives, crowdsourcing the identification of individuals in old photographs or things like that. So, and that's been actually quite interesting and successful. One early effort to try to measure success in terms of how much business and trade and economic activity has been spurred by this NYU's government GovLab is doing an Open Data 500 project with some Knight Foundation funding. They're basically trying to look at what businesses have either been generated or have successfully used data assets from government agencies that have been released to build new startups that have had some kind of success. So, and e-regulation is another platform. I'll take too long to discuss, and I'm over time already, so I will stop there. But I'll happily answer questions about anything. So thank you very much.